The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly, I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." Here ends today's reading.
These verses from the Gospel of John include a curious fragment of an exchange between Philip, a newly called disciple, and a man named Nathanael of Cana. When Philip claims that he has found the Messiah, the one about whom Moses and the prophets wrote, Nathanael responds with a question that implies ridicule. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? In an effort to make some sense out of this question, let's look at a few facts about Nazareth in Bible times. This village of about 15,000 was in a valley above the plain of Esdraelon in Galilee. Here was Nazareth. It lay on the Roman road to Jerusalem. And though somewhat secluded, was still in contact with the whole world, the known world of the time. It was only a few miles from the Sea of Galilee. Joseph and Mary lived there at the time of their betrothal. Joseph worked as a carpenter in Nazareth, possibly because it was near Sepphoris, a city being built by Herod Antipas. It was here that the announcement of Jesus's birth came to Mary. Here Jesus grew up and came of age. Nazareth comes from the root netzer, meaning branch or shoot. Remember, King David had been promised that a Messiah would be a descendant, a branch from his royal line. The birth narratives in the gospel refer repeatedly to Jesus' coming from the house of David. With an awareness of this kind of prophecy, why would a spiritual seeker like Nathanael show disdain for Jesus' roots in Nazareth? Well, it seems that to be referred to as a Nazarene was to be seen as having an sketchy reputation. Somehow this reputation developed out of a widely held view that Galileans, in contrast to the more righteous and sophisticated folks of Judea, lacked culture and spoke a rude dialect. Our only account of the Nazarenes in stories of Jesus's ministry portrays them in a rather bad light. It was to Nazareth that Jesus returned after his baptism by John to begin his public ministry. He stood before a crowd of his kinsmen and read these words from Isaiah. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Beautiful words. Then he rolled up the scroll and sat down, saying, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Well, that was far more arrogance than his hometown folk could take from Joseph, the carpenter's son. And Jesus was driven out to the edge of town where the angry crowd tried to throw him off the cliff. Matthew argues in the gospel that the Old Testament prophet Isaiah had earlier written the Messiah would come and would be a root springing up out of the dry ground. He would be despised and rejected by others and held of no account. Out of this dry ground, the branch, came Jesus. Well, it would be difficult to find any period of history or any people who have ever been free of cultural bias. False notions formed into negative generalizations about groups different from themselves. Sometimes these biases are virulent and explosive as they have been in this very painful and divisive time in our nation's history between white and Black or brown citizens. And sometimes they are more subtle and undercover, as perhaps they have been for years before this. In modern history on a large scale, they have included the American system of slavery of African people, the disrespect of the Native American people and their culture resulting in their annihilation and the thievery of their land, the profound distrust of Middle Eastern immigrants who speak Arabic language and are practicing Muslims. And history across the ocean includes such examples as Hitler's mass executions of Jewish people, dehumanizing violence between the Jewish and Palestinian people, the enmity between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland, and that between Indians and Pakistanis, and the hatred between tribes in Africa that have led to genocide. On a more subtle level, there has always been the injurious stereotyping and name-calling between peoples of different cultures, religions, political parties, genders, ages, income, and education levels, rural and urban dwellers. It is the challenge of many nations and religions to address these prejudices, not to let them be swept under the rug, but to be called out. The biases that cause so much division and fear and so much abuse and suffering in our world. But let's look again more closely at Philip's response to Nathanael's biased question. Philip replied simply, "Come and see." You don't believe me? Take a look. Jesus was somehow not offended by Nathanael's skepticism about his origins, but rather impressed. Jesus declared, "Here is a man in which there is no deceit." Today, he might say, Nathanael has the courage to voice his assumptions, however flawed, to tell it like he sees it. Jesus's perceptiveness immediately begins to intrigue Nathanael, who then retorts, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answers, "I saw you under the fig tree." The remark contains humor, which we modern readers wouldn't understand without a little background. Pious Jews at that time, another way of saying it, well-read, right, studied the Torah under a fig tree. Jesus was poking at this piety indirectly and humorously to let Nathanael know, "I see through you, buddy." Nathanael develops a respect for Jesus's playful perceptiveness about him, and he begins to see Jesus in a new light. When he acknowledges who Jesus is, Jesus, for all, whatever the word is, and purposes, you ain't seen nothing yet. In the recounting of whatever conversation took place that day, the editor's literary style uses stiff and rather formal language, but despite this, I see something quite familiar in the dialogue. Have you ever noticed the way, and I'm going to say men even more than women, have you ever noticed the way men who trust each other, especially good friends, allow themselves to speak to each other? They often have a sparring quality to their conversation. I know some of you named Bob probably don't get this at all. Let me go back. They have a sparring quality to their conversation, and they respect the other for getting in a good and somewhat fair jab. They test each other and challenge each other good-naturedly in conversation, and in this way they show each other respect. I see something of this verbal sparring between Philip, Nathanael, and Jesus. It's a sparring that combines skepticism with perceptiveness, candidness, honesty and playfulness and results in mutual respect. In Philip's simple reply, "Come and see," lies a profound hope beyond prejudice. In the willingness to take a real look at a person who wears your stereotype, to listen and give that person a chance to show who they are, lies a potential for moving beyond our biases, to have the courage to make real contact with another and with what you are able to learn, to shed your egotistical pride enough to let go of former assessments of them, to be willing to come and see. This week, Joe Biden will be inaugurated as the 46th President of the United States. Kamala Harris will be the first woman and the first African American of African American descent to hold the vice presidential office. Biden has put together a cabinet that is more diverse than any in our history. This 24-person cabinet is almost divided equally by gender. It includes 13 men and 11 women, including the first woman Secretary of the Treasurer, the first African American Defense Secretary, the first openly gay cabinet member, the first Native American cabinet secretary. We are a diverse nation. We cannot remain a divided one. Americans approach this historic day with very different perspectives about the one who will be taking office. This is true not just of this historic presidential election, but of any president when they first come to power. Some of us feel drawn to them or are in agreement with their political viewpoints, proposed policies, and others are not. But the good citizen, however skeptical or politically opposed, must be willing to simply come and see, not to fall victim to stereotypes that block perfect perception. Can anything good come out of Nazareth or India or Africa, or for that matter, Scranton, Pennsylvania? Come and see. Listen to what the new leaders propose for our future. See if any of it rings true or will begin to ring true. See if their policies over time can begin to bring the results we all want to see. A stronger economy, more and better employment, an end to this terrible pandemic, good education for our children, affordable health care, the healing of a dangerous divide between the peoples of the United States. See if they can earn your respect and your trust. Come and see speaks nothing of passive acceptance, but rather of the call to perceptive and active engagement. A thriving democracy requires that we spar with each other over differing perspectives, policies, and political parties, not engaging in name calling and violent conflict, but in productive, trust building discourse. Tuesday, January 20, 2021 is Inauguration Day. Now it's a tense time in our nation following a riot by a violent crowd that broke into the Capitol, threatened the vice president with a noose, and the Speaker of the House, and all the members of the House and Senate, some of whom got COVID as a result of their time underneath in the tunnels. To say nothing of the abuse and murder of Capitol Police who were charged with and committed to protecting these leaders and government property. The word inaugurate means to start up or to get things going. But here's the interesting part, and I've used this before. I want to say in 2008 when I talked about inauguration. Here's the interesting part. It comes from the Latin root augur, au, meaning bird, and gur, meaning chatter. So augur means bird chatter. There, is that helpful? Does that mean that a president's inaugural speech is no more than the chattering of birds? No, this word has a more venerable origin. In ancient Rome, when you had an important task to do, you checked with the gods before proceeding. Rome developed official state augurs who would let the leaders know what the gods thought about the task. Think of the phrase still used today, that doesn't augur well. I imagine that sometimes these ancient augurs got it wrong. They didn't always augur well. But what does this all have to do with bird talk? In looking for the signs from the gods, these ancient augurs looked to the behavior of the birds, how they flew together or apart, how they were chirping or pecking. So the Latin inaugurare came to mean looking for omens, looking to the heavens, and only with their guidance, taking action. When we inaugurate a new leader, we must realize that as citizens, we have collectively chosen in a free and fair system of elections and are now being given the opportunity to also be inaugurated ourselves, to start something new with our collective lives as a nation. In a democracy, citizens are called to be part of the equation. Good leaders require good citizens to lead effectively. We are called to augur, to pay attention, and look for the signs that can guide each of us and all of us into the future. At the end of the Civil War, just 6 days before his murder in 1865, President Lincoln delivered his memorable inaugural address, charging the American people with their task as citizens, using these words: with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. And so I conclude this morning with the words we hear so many statesmen and women use at the end of their speeches, and which far too often ring a bit false. I hope you'll hear them today, not as an arrogant claim of our superior national worth, not as a way of saying, I am right, we are right, you are wrong, but as a humble plea for God's inaugurating guidance over this nation on this very important day and in the coming days and years. God bless America. Amen.